I want to thank you so much that I can share a little bit of my life and to tell you how the Lord has led me every step of the way, really. I was born in Germany in the year of World War II, that World War II started. At that time, we lived in Berlin, which was the capital then, as it is now. I am the youngest of 4 children. These are my brothers, and I just want to quickly go ahead and tell you just something about them. 2 of them are now living in Australia, and the third, the one in the middle, the boy in the middle, his life was sadly cut short when he was 19 years old, as he was fighting for the French Foreign Legion. He was, to me, he was one of the nicest people that I've ever met, and he's really missed, even now. I was brought up, we were all brought up believing in God, and for me, God was always, as far as I can remember, God was always real, but there was no personal relationship, and I certainly did not know my Savior, the one who died for me. So my mother was the best mom that a child could ever have. And even though both my parents believed in God, but they also had a high regard for the leader at that time, for Hitler. And like most Germans, even if German people nowadays say they never believed in him, but it's not true. Most of them did believe in him, and so did my parents. But my mother was a wonderful woman, as you will hear throughout my memories of my childhood. My father was an officer in the German army. I don't have many childhood memories of him because as the war was going on, he only every now and then came to visit us. He was always stationed. He was part in Italy and Greece and on the island Crete, so I didn't see too much of him. And when I was about between 2 and 3 years old, like little Abigail, where's she? Little Abigail, that age, the bombs started to fall over Berlin. And my mom said, well, we are leaving. One of the neighbors, they laughed at her, and he said, oh, look, you cannot honestly believe that a bomb will fall on this house. I mean, Berlin was always a large city, even at that time. And he said, and we live in an outer suburb. It had got forests and lakes and parks. Why would a bomb fall on this house? But Mom's mind was made up, and we packed as much as we could carry, and we left Berlin. We went into the country, into a town called Crossen, to live in my aunt. She had an apartment in that house, and that is where I spent most of the years of the war. My earliest memories are of sirens blaring in the night. The sirens were warning of approaching bombers, approaching planes, and then my mom would shake me out of my sleep and then quickly dress me, and we would rush into the shelter, or sometimes in the cellar. I think there it was more the cellar. We went underneath the house, and I don't think we ever had a night where we could sleep right through the night. Never. Every night the planes came. Now, as the war was escalating, we heard that the Russians were marching on Crossen. And so we had to flee, like most of the people who lived there. And it was too dangerous to go by train, because as half the population from Crossen went by train, it often happened that children got separated from their parents and never ever found them again. Never ever. Years ago, they were still searching for them. So my mom said, no, we are not going by train, we'll hitchhike. And this is what we did, hailing cars, hailed a car, and often army cars. And my mom would pay them handsomely, and they would take us to the next town. And one day, we found ourselves in a little obscure little town. And it was already late, and we had to find a place to sleep. So we knew that the churches, they were always transformed into refugee centers. And we went to the local church, and it was a 3 stories high building. And the building, with every story and every classroom, was covered with straw, and that's where people slept on it. And what we didn't know was that this obscure little town was one of Hitler's secret headquarters during the war. We didn't know that, but the people who bombed us, they obviously knew that. So we went to sleep, and of course, in the middle of the night, the siren sounded, and Mom woke up and he said, let's get out of here, because if we get hit, 3 stories high, if we get hit, all the floors covered with straw, that burns very nicely, and only the people in straw, and we go up in flames. So we headed for the door, and many others were in for the doors, and the doors were locked. They locked us in to avoid a panic. So then they switched off the lights. And we stood there in total darkness. I mean, I sat through, every night I sat through a bomb alarm. But it wasn't so bad under the houses and in the shelters. You could still hear it, but it was subdued, and it was further away. But now we were right in the middle of it, in a normal house. And I know that is the one that the memories that stayed with me right till this day, actually. Standing there in pitch darkness and just listening to the bombs. As they come down, they would whistle, just a high whistle, and then you heard an earth-shattering explosion. And the people screamed, or maybe I screamed, I don't know. And my brother, he tried to comfort me, and he said, don't worry, Mousy. They called me Mousy, and I was just a little mouse. Don't worry, the bomb that you hear has already fallen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't get us. The one that hit us, we won't hear. Well, even though I was small, but it wasn't much of a comfort for me. Can't say that. And then I remember we were all huddling together. Mom, my grandma, we had taken my grandma with us. Grandma, Mom, my brothers, and myself, and we stood there in the circle and hugged one another, and Grandma prayed. And then what seemed like an eternity, finally the bombing stopped. And the lights came on, and the doors opened, and we walked outside. And everything looked so different. And then at first light that morning, we knew what had happened. All the houses around that 3-story high church, school, all the houses were gone. They were either in ruin or just rubble. But the church, the school, 3-story high, was untouched. Now, to me, that was amazing. Yeah. And even now, I often ask myself, why us? We weren't better or worse than all the others. So why would God have saved it? Was it the prayer of my grandma? And I'm sure that many others would have prayed in that school. I don't know. But it was a miracle, and it was absolutely amazing. So we went on to a small town called Trebin, where my other grandmother had owned a house. And there we spent the rest of the war years. Mom called us out one night and she said, "Come children, have a look." And we went outside, it was night, and she said, "Look up," and we looked up, and there above us was a circle of little lights. I thought they were beautiful. We called them little Christmas trees. But what there were flares. I don't know how that works. Either they were dropped by the planes or shot up, I don't know. But somehow they stayed in the atmosphere. And they were mapping out an area that would receive a massive bombing. That's why it was sort of circled. And we were right in the middle. Of course, when you look in the sky, everything seemed smaller than what it really is. It was a large circle, but we were still in the middle because we were then near, Trebin was near Berlin. And Mom said to us, "Well, children, this is it. We are in for it tonight." And she said to me, "Pray." She said, "Pray, because God hears children." Maybe she knew that God wouldn't hear them as adults, because Germany, there was a great sin upon Germany. But I'm not going to get political here now. So that night, we sat and waited, and waited, and waited, and nothing happened. It was all quiet. The next day came, and we learned that that was the night when Germany surrendered. So we were spared once again. God's hand is so amazing. God's grace, his power is amazing, but also his grace so undeserved for us, that he spared us once again. Even though we believed in God, but there was no personal relationship and so on. So the war was over. Now then the Russians came. And the rumor had it that the Russian soldiers, well, they weren't very good to the civilians. And Mom believed it, and she said, "Let's go into the forest." So we took a few things and we ran into the forest. And we stayed in the forest for about a week, day and night. We were hiding in there. Then somewhere my mother must have got news that it was safe to return to grandmother's house. And then we did. But as soon as we were there were the big bangs on the door, and the Russian soldiers came. Well, what they wanted, they didn't molest us, as people thought they would, but they didn't. But what they wanted is always watches and jewelry. And Mom she had quite a lot, and she gave them, but they always said more, more, more. No wonder it was more. And finally, Mom had nothing more to give. That was it. They didn't believe her. And then one of the soldiers, he had lined us up all against the wall under gunpoint. And he said to Mom, "If you don't bring out more jewelry, we shoot them, we shoot the kids one by one." I mean, Mom would have given her life in an instant if she had any, but she had nothing more to give. And somehow, in my mind, I can see God's hand being over us. Yeah, as in the story of Joseph, in Joseph of Egypt, it always says, "But God," whatever happened, but God. And here too, but God. It was not God's will. And for some reason, They believed her. He put down his gun and all the soldiers walked out. Then my mom said, well, this is it. I had enough here of Trebin. We go back to Berlin. So we went back to Berlin. And this is how we found Berlin when we came back. That is an aerial shot of Berlin in 1945. Even the houses which were still standing were partly damaged. So we found accommodation, we found a house, actually where my grandma used to live. And it was livable, yeah? It was okay, we could stay there. But I remember the outer wall had little spots in several places where we could see the sky. And that was the outside wall there. And what was even worse, the first winter in Berlin was the coldest that Berlin ever had, or even Europe ever had. And it was said that with the wind chill, it was 40 degrees minus. Yeah. Everything was frozen, pipes were frozen. We were all sick in bed, and only Mum she got up and she nursed us and she went for supplies. He even had to get drinking water in special containers where the water would not freeze. And I remember that she spilled a little bit of water on the ground and went for a cloth to wipe it up, and it was already ice inside the house. Yeah. It was terrible. We came close to freeze to death. So after that came the hunger. The Russians wanted to starve us because the Germans, during the war, they surrounded St. Petersburg and they starved the people there. So this was their revenge. The Russians were right around Berlin. That's why they called us Berliners the islanders. Yeah, we were just like a little island. Yeah. So they blocked all the roads. No food could come in. Even the Americans, I mean, the Americans won the war, but they couldn't come in without risking another war. So food rations began, and the food got less and less and less, and we came to just one slice of dark rye bread each for the whole day. That was the food for the whole day. Nothing more. And we would have starved. If it had gone on, we would have starved, definitely. But God. Yeah. It was not God's plan to starve us. God used the Americans to save Berlin, even though we were their enemies. The Americans are actually a good-hearted people. They may be I don't know, it doesn't matter. But they are good-hearted people, really. And so the Americans, they thought of a solution. They built what we called an air bridge. Every 2 minutes, a plane flew over Berlin and dropping food parcels. We called them the raisin bombers because the Americans, first they dropped bombs on us, and now they drop food on us. And so this way we were saved. Berlin was saved. And when the Russians saw that they couldn't stop the Americans from flying every 2 minutes, flying over Berlin, then they opened the doors again. Now the Berliners, in gratitude, they built a memorial for that, which they called the air bridge, which you see there. And the plane you see there was one of the actual planes that dropped the food for us. So we were saved from starvation, but not from hunger. It was never enough food. At this time, I was 6 years old, and I started school. And again, the American Quakers donated food for the school children. And so every day at school we got a little can of food, either a soup or a stew or some rice or whatever, which was really good. And I remember one day I walked back from school. I had a long way to walk, and one through a little bit isolated area with my little can, and I got mugged for my food. I turned around the corner, and two large teenage boys stopped me, and they wanted my food, and I wasn't going to give it to them. And then one of the boys, he pulled out a knife and held it against my throat. Well, that convinced me, actually, that I should give them the food. But God, in his infinite mercy, he even then held his hand over me. And he knew that I needed the food. Yeah, I mean, we just looked like coat hangers. There was nothing on us. And that the other boy, he looked down on that little pipsqueak of a girl, and then he said to his mate with a knife, he said, "Oh, come on, let her go. Give her back her food." And he did it. He gave me back my food. And I dashed off like a little rabbit. I ran all the way home. So then the Americans came. God's miracles were never ending. The Americans came in, and actually my brother said to me, "Mousy," he said, "I'm going to teach you English," because we were always hungry. He said, "What you're going to do is, when the Americans walk, they always went for walks with their girls. Just go up to one and say," they were my first English words, and say, "Have you chewing gum?" Little 6-year-old. And then most of them gave us some chewing gum. and then I gave it then to my brothers, stupid me. And then I remember one soldier came, and I went up to him and I said, "Have you chewing gum?" And he looked down at me and he said, "Yes," and walked off. And that was the first time in my very young life that I felt shame. And right there and then I stopped my chewing gum mission for my brothers. No more. That was it. Yeah. So the Americans came in, and they needed accommodation. They built barracks and houses for them, but it wasn't enough at first. So they evacuated us. We had to leave, even though our house was far from being good. But they moved us all into the oldest houses, and all together, all the people. And they moved us into a house with an elderly lady who was in the last stages of tuberculosis, and she was already coughing blood. Now, my mom and my grandma, they were frantic. They said, "Don't go near her. Don't touch anything." But how can you do that? When you live in the same house, you share the bathroom, you share the kitchen. It's just impossible. But by God's amazing grace, none of us ever contracted that dreadful disease. And even years after, every year, as long as we were in Germany, every year we had to go for X-ray to make sure that our lungs were clear, right until the day we left for Australia. That was so amazing. And I thought, now, wherever we are not safe, no matter where we are, except in God's hands. There we are safe. So finally, ever so slowly, the times became better, and a little better anyway. Hunger was always there. And I grew up. Other interests invaded my life, and God sort of moved a little bit back into the background, or on the back burner, as they say. I still believed in him, but There were too many other interests coming. And so when I was 18, my brothers were already in Australia, and it was Mum's and my turn. And we had to go to the town of Bremen. Bremen, those who know fairy tales, they know the Bremen town musicians. The donkey and dog and cat and rooster. You probably don't know the fairy tales anymore, but this is the town of Bremen. There we had to be in a camp where all the hundreds of people that would go on the ship had all the paperwork had to be completed, and we all needed a clean bill of health, of course. And I hated, that's me and Mum, and I hated camp. Maybe that's the reason why I still hate camps. I don't know, I couldn't stand it, didn't like it. So finally, the day came and we went to the harbor, and there was our ship, which was to become our home for the next almost 6 weeks. We were at sea. And because the Suez Canal was closed at that time, we had to go around Africa, and it was marvelous. So I got to see on the west of Africa, I got to see the Canary Islands, and we went through Cape Town, and we had 24 hours in Cape Town, and I just loved it. For the first time in my life, I saw the Southern Hemisphere. I thought twice as much stars as we had in the Northern Hemisphere. It was beautiful. I loved it. And, oops, sorry. And there we go up on the gangway on the 1st of April, 1957. And with that, a chapter closed in my life, and a new beginning started. And this is just the last photo in Germany. It says, goodbye, Germany, with all the memories of bombs and war and cold and hunger. And it was hello, Australia, a land of plenty, of warmth, of sunshine, and it was beautiful. And within 2 weeks, I had a job, which my brother got for me, and I said to him, I can't even speak English yet, except for have you chewing gum, but that's not good enough. So he said, it doesn't matter. He said, it's a photographic laboratory. And the boss is a German-speaking Jew, and he employs Germans as well. So, okay, I said, I went, and I was interviewed, and he accepted me, and he said, come, I show you, I take you to the laboratory and introduce you to the manager. And he did, and he said, and this is Mr. Heukeshoven. And to myself, I thought, Mr. what? It's not a German name. It took me quite a long time to even remember the name. I had to actually see it written down before I remembered it. But 2 years down the track, we got married, and God gave us 2 treasures, John and Judy. John's hair was a bit longer then. And they were a joy to me from day one right until tonight, every day of my life, always. Even through the trying teens, they were always a joy to me. So life was good. Life was terrific. But then another hunger set in. And it was, I think, a spiritual hunger. Because I started questioning. I said, everything is fine. We got heaps and even more. But what's the use? Every day I get up, I do the same things, and then at the end there's only death. And it horrified me. And I thought, one moment I'm here, and then the next moment I don't exist anymore. I said, so what's the use of it all? But God must have seen the struggle. And he granted me 2 encounters with himself. Don't know why, but he did. And I'd like to share them with you. I hope you are not going to sleep yet on me. I call them Bobby and the Autobahn. Bobby was our dog. Bobby was big and black and had a ferocious bark. He was a gentle dog, but he was also a nuisance. And complaints came, and then the council sent us a letter, we have to get rid of him. And we tried to get rid of him, but we couldn't. No one wanted Bobby. So we came to that heartbreaking decision, we have to have him put down. There was no other way. We couldn't keep him locked up. He wasn't used to that, being locked up. So I thought then, well, in that case, I ring the vet right now, right away, because I can't bear looking at the dog. And I have to get it over and done with. I rang the vet, and he said, yes, he said, but it was a Friday. He said, not today. He said, come on Monday, because Melbourne had a transport strike, and he said they didn't have anyone to take the dead animal away. So this was one of the worst weekends I ever had, looking at the dog, thinking he trusts us, he loves us, and yet in 2 days we take his life. And my brother rang that day, my brother Wolfgang from Adelaide, and we told him that, and he was as distressed as we were. And then Sunday night came, and I took Bobby in my arms, and I just cried into his fur. And I said goodbye to him, and then went to bed. Bobby had to go outside during the night, so I went with him. I waited for Bobby, and I stood outside, and I looked up into the sky, and there I started to pray. And it was always, dear God, it wasn't the Lord or anything like that. So I said, dear God, don't let Bobby know what's going to happen to him. Don't let him feel pain or fear. Don't let him know that we are deserting him. And tears running down, of course. And strangely enough, when I went back to bed, for the first time, maybe the first time in my life, I had a real peace in my heart after I had prayed to God. And then the next day, we took Bobby to the vet, and we spent a very quiet morning. No one felt like talking. And suddenly the phone rings. I went to answer it, and it was my brother Wolfgang again. And he said, I got a home for Bobby. I said, I got friends in Adelaide. They have a hobby farm, and they take Bobby. I said to him, now you ring. Bobby's dead. And he said to me, well, ring the vet, because sometimes they don't put him down right away. He might have other animals in the surgery. I said, oh, I can do it. So I hung up and dialed the vet, and he said, he came and I said, is our dog still alive? And he said, yes, why? And I remember I almost screamed into the phone, don't do it, don't put the needle into him. Don't touch him, we have a home for him. And then John and Judy was at school. John and my husband, they went to pick Bobby up from the vet. I was on my own at home, and that was the first time in my life that I felt like going down on my knees and thanking that wonderful God of ours. And so that time, and the day after, we left for Adelaide with John and Judy and Bobby on the back seat, and dropped Bobby off, and he had a beautiful time in the farm, on the hobby farm, and lived another 7 years there. I now knew that God was real for the first time, and yet I didn't do anything about it. 2 years passed, and we took the children to Germany. And in Germany, they gave us a little car, and that we could drive around and visit our relatives. And we visited my father, who lived near Cologne. And it got a bit late that night, and he said, take the Autobahn, much quicker. Yeah, much quicker, the Autobahn. They called it progress, I called it a nightmare. It was I'm old-fashioned, I don't like all these new things. Anyway, my husband said, well, we haven't got much petrol, but we can fill up the first petrol station we pass. So we went onto the Autobahn, and there was no petrol station. No petrol station, and we missed the turn-off. I think we kept going in circles. And I looked at the petrol gauge. They got the driver sits on that side, not on this side, on this side. I looked over, and the petrol gauge was below empty. And we went on and on and on. And then I started to pray again. And I said, dear God, God was always the spare tire. I said, help, just help. Don't know what to do. Where do we park? In what we heard later, it is illegal to park. It is illegal to stop on the Autobahn. Because there is no speed limit. You can drive 280 if you like, if you want to. They had even on the internet, we saw the speedometer of a car on the Autobahn with 250. You're not allowed to stop, and you have to make sure you filled up your car before you enter the Autobahn, and that your car is in working order. If you stop, well, I don't know what they would do, but in Germany everything is forbidden anyway. So I became really worried. Next time I looked, and the needle was right on the bottom, couldn't go down any further. And I thought to myself, well, how long does this tiny little car go without petrol? And then finally, in the far distance, we saw a petrol station, and we went up to it. And before we reached it, the car started to splutter and cough and made funny noises, and then stopped and just rolled and rolled right up to the pump. And at the pump, it stopped, didn't go any further. The petrol station attendant, he came out and he started to fill up the car, and he said, "My, you must have been on the last drop." I knew we were. And then he said, "You are lucky, because I am the only petrol station here in the whole district, in the whole area." And then we went on our way. And mind you, even though I believed in God, I knew no Christians. I never went to church. I never read the Bible. And as I looked on the horizon, I saw the figure of a man, and he waved, like someone waving in greeting. It was just a split second. It was gone. To me, I thought right away, that's Jesus. He's calling me. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Maybe it was a vision, or maybe it was an angel. I don't know. But for one thing is for sure, it left me with almost an obsession to know God, this time for real. I wanted to know him. I had to know him. I was thinking, what was he like? Did he really talk to people? What did he do? And I couldn't wait to get back to Australia and to start reading the Bible. And when we did, I went to the shelf and picked up our old dusty family Bible, and I curled up on the ground there, on the floor, on the carpet, and opened the Bible for the first time in my life. On Genesis, first chapter, yeah, right in the beginning. and never closed it again, never. And it was as if someone had opened a door to a new life, a total new world. And I devoured the scriptures. I rushed through my housework just to any minute to read the scriptures. And then I came to, well, somewhere Leviticus, Numbers, and my enthusiasm took a sharp drop. And I thought now, and I was reading about all these sacrifices, and because I love animals so much, and I couldn't. I didn't understand that these sacrifices only foreshadowed the ultimate sacrifice, that Jesus that died for our sins. I didn't know it at the time. And I thought, no, I can't go on like this. But God, again, but God. He saw it, and his hand was on me, and he would not let me go. Mom came to visit us, and one day, and she said on the train station, there were some men, and they were handing out Christian literature. And they gave her a book. And she said, and she read the book, and she didn't like it, because it was written by a Jew. And then my ears shot up. Now that interested me, because I always loved the Jews for some reason. I don't know why. My parents certainly didn't. And I always wanted to know why wouldn't the Jews, why wouldn't they love Jesus? Because Jesus was a Jew. And so Mom said, well, she said, you love the Jews. If you want the book, you can have it. And I said, yes, I want it. And I started to read it, and I read it 3 times in a row before I finally put it down. And something broke in me. It was like a dam breaking. To the first 2 times that I read this book, I was just crying throughout the book. This man, a Polish Jew who lost all his family except for one person in the notorious concentration camp Auschwitz. He had no hatred, no animosity towards my people, none at all. But he spoke, in his book, he spoke about the longing he had for God and for the Messiah, and he found the Messiah in Jesus. And when he said that, I recognized that longing in me. And I knew that was it. That is what I wanted, and that is what I needed. That is what I was searching for, really. And so I thought, I really want to get in touch with him. And then we have 2 voices, I think. One voice to me said, get in touch with him, read, get to know him. And the other voice said, don't be a nut. You know, no one reads a book and wants to talk to the author. And I looked on the back cover, and I realized that he lived in Melbourne, and not all that far from where we live. And now began a struggle. Every day I said, I'll ring him. And then the other voice said, come on, you can't do that. No. And that went on for way over a week. I know it was over a week. And then one day I said, well, today either I do it, I ring him, or I close the book and that's it, and finish. And I went to the phone. I said, it doesn't matter. What if he thinks I'm missing a cent in the dollar? It doesn't matter. Yeah? Or if he thinks I haven't got all my cups in the cupboard. So what? Doesn't matter. He never sees me. He doesn't know me. So I went to the phone and I said, all right, I ring him. Still hoping that he wouldn't answer. But he did. And we talked for a while. I told him that I read his book and I liked it. And did he have any other books? And he said, yes. He said, I can send you some. Not right now, he said. And this is amazing. He said, because we've just come back from Europe this morning. We arrived back from Europe. And, and we haven't even unpacked. But once we unpacked, I'm going to send you some books. And I thought, wow, had I rung just one day earlier, I wouldn't have got an answer. Because him and his dear wife, they were the only ones living in that house. And maybe I would have just closed the Bible and not take it up again. I don't know. But so we became acquainted and we became good friends. And he took me, this is the first verse that really spoke to my heart, that really came alive to my heart, as if someone stood next to me and saying it. And that was from Revelation 3:20. And it says, when Jesus said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him and he with me." And I remember thinking, I want to open that door. I want Jesus to come in. Yeah. So this Jewish man, Paul Tangney, he took me to a little German Baptist church. And there I gave my heart to the Lord, and he baptized me 1978 on Good Friday. That was a special day for me. And it was what I wanted. I wanted then to be baptized on Good Friday, and he did. And after I was baptized, my children, practically at the same time as myself, turned to the Lord and gave their hearts to Jesus. And half a year later, my brother came to know the Lord, and his wife, and all his children, one by one, they came to be baptized. And more than that, both my parents, my dad and my mom, who lived for so long under the shadow of that demonized maniac Adolf Hitler, they too came to know the Jewish Messiah. Yeah? Indirectly, through the book of this Jewish man. Maybe because this Jewish man had forgiveness is always stronger than hatred. And he had only love and forgiveness in his heart. And so it did a lot of good in my family. A lot of things happened. And so I just want to say, in looking back at my life, I noticed how he led me and provided for me and protected me every step of the way, as he does to all of us. It is so wonderful. For us, it is just to reach up and take his hand. And now when I think back with my loving family that I have, and a free country, still a free country here, and a great church, and a church family that is so dear to my heart. I am most greatly blessed, I know that. 1988, we came to Queensland. My husband came with me, and we joined a Baptist church, even though he didn't believe it but at that time, but he came with me. In 2010, when Pastor Sam Bourne resigned, we went to, I knew then that I had to find another church. And I remember, and I don't know if my precious Judy, we came from Rockhampton. I don't know if you remember that day, and we parked, either it was KFC across the road, KFC or the petrol station. And I just mentioned to Judy, just sort of in passing, I said, well, I have to look for a new church now. And I remember Judy pointed and she said, well, why don't you try that little church up on the hill? And I said, yeah, I could give it a try, could go there one day. And one day I did it. And after the first service, I knew it would be my church. Yeah. And so I thank God. I thank God for saving me, for saving my worthless life, really. And I often was worthless. And I thank him also now for bringing me through this torment up here. And this verse, oh, the depths of the riches, both of wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. Thank you for listening.